Coming up on this episode of Fresh Web Dev, we recap our look at plugin development on WordPress.
And we hit on some topics, tips, and techniques that we weren't able to mention in our previous videos.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of Fresh Web Dev. I'm your host, Dan.
And I'm Scott.
Well, Scott, it's been a journey.
Yes, it has.
We've been creating a plugin on this show. It kind of teaches you how to create WordPress stuff. And we started with just sort of what WordPress plugin development meant. We talked about choosing a file structure in one of the episodes. Then we got into WordPress hooks. Then we talked about creating WordPress hooks, filters, things like that. Mm-hmm. We even went as far as helping you create an options panel within your plugin, sprucing it up, making it look nicer, the plugin and the options panel itself. Implementation of shortcodes or creating custom shortcodes, which is always really cool. And then we capped it off last time with a look at activation and deactivation hooks. So we've gone through quite a lot. This episode is sort of going to be your primer, or sort of a look back and what we talked about, and kind of from start to finish, and then maybe some stuff we didn't mention before.
Yeah, so we'll kind of wrap some things up, throw out some little quick tips and hints that we didn't get through in those previous episodes. So
Scott, off the books here, are there any specific kind of pieces of advice you have for people who are going out, maybe even given what we talked about in other episodes, what like very, very kind of macro tips you have for people getting out there, creating their first plugin?
Yeah, definitely. One of the first things, and we didn't cover this necessarily in our episodes, is template tags. Mm-hmm. And these are kind of functions that you would create that would allow other developers, if the plugin was installed, to just simply paste that function wherever they might want to, output a map, let's say, or our social share button, something like that, in their certain areas throughout their site, whether it be the header, the content area, sidebar, footer, and virtually anywhere throughout the theme. So, when you are creating these functions, you want to make sure you prefix them. Mm-hmm. In our case, we'd probably use like SDS underscore, something like that.
Design Studio.
And we have done this with our Simple Share Links plugin. So, just another good idea, another way that other developers can kind of utilize what you've created and place it throughout their theme where they may see fit. Another tip, or some tips that we have here for functions that we didn't get to talk about would be functions that we think you probably should be aware of when you're creating a plugin. Mm-hmm. Two of them are PHP specific, two of them are WordPress specific. Okay. We'll cover the WordPress specific ones first. Plugin dir path. This particular function gets the file system directory path with a trailing slash for the file that's passed into it. Okay. Can be useful if you need to reference that throughout your plugin for whatever you might be doing. The next one is plugins URL, and this simply retrieves the absolute URL to the plugins directory without a trailing slash. So again, might be useful if you need to, let's say, enqueue a script or something that's located inside of your plugin file, and you need to get that directory, for use on the front end, to make sure that path is correct.
Sure.
The other two functions, and the first one kind of goes hand in hand with those template tags we talked about, because you'll probably, as a developer, want to use this one. It's called function_exists, and this is a PHP function that checks to see if a function with the same name already exists anywhere in the scope of all the files loaded. So you may or may not know if another plugin developer has the same prefix that you do and the same function name. Very good idea.
Maybe it was San Diego Studio or something.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
SDS.
And now we have a conflict, right? So you definitely want to use this, especially with those template tags. If you are a developer using those tags, you just want to make sure if the function does exist that you can actually output it. Because also, if it doesn't exist, you'll get a warning in PHP or an error that says, cannot find this function. So you definitely want to make sure you're using that function exists. And in our case, we don't necessarily use it because we've coded our plugin, our social plugin, in a class file. And we talked about that, I believe, somewhere around episode 2 of this series. And the last one, and we do use this one, is called class exists. So we're checking in our plugin to make sure that a class called simple share links doesn't already exist. And the reason for that is if it does, if somebody created a plugin or a theme has a class, with the same name, there's going to be a conflict in PHP. We're going to end up with a fatal error, and then, user sites are going to be broken, and they're not going to like that.
Never,
so
ever good.
Definitely want to make sure you do check for those, check to make sure those classes don't exist or do exist, depending on what you're using your functionality for. And then also the function exists. Is
kind of work hand in hand, but for different pieces of the puzzle.
Exactly. Yep. And then we kind of have some other tips here. As a developer going through, first one I can think of, and this may be the most important, maybe after commenting, but code reuse.
Especially in the WordPress framework, everything's open source and people are helping each other out in a lot of senses.
Yeah, exactly. So code reuse, as a developer, if you can save yourself some time and also make your updates easier in the future, definitely reuse your code as much as possible. If, for instance, you have an area in your plugin, you're developing it, and you say, okay, on the content, I'm outputting this, and then on, after the sidebar, I'm outputting this, and you're outputting the same information, it kind of makes sense just to put that all into one function and use that function, as opposed to having that same output in your plugin, 2 different areas, and then you go and make a change, and now you have to update both of those areas. So code reuse, definitely save yourself some time, allow for easier updates when you're going in there and making any changes. And this second one kind of goes hand in hand with code reuse. Define constants that contain your version info for your plugin. A reference to the plugin file using the magic constants. We talked about that in the last episode. We use _, capital file, _. Plugin directory, make sure you have a constant for that, your current plugin directory, because you may use that, like I said, when you're queuing some scripts or styles. And then your plugin URL, again, for the front-end use. Good to define these constants up at the top of your plugin, and we've done this in our example. And then that way you can use them throughout your code without having to, again, create the same functionality in multiple spots.
Goes back to the plugins URL that we were talking about a little earlier, the other function we were talking about.
Yes, and then plugin dir path or directory path as well.
Comment. I like this one a lot.
Yeah, I do too. So for not even just this reason, but WordPress is open source. Most likely your plugins, it's going to be open source especially if you're releasing it on the WordPress repo. But nonetheless, when somebody installs it, they can see the source code anyway. So many people looking at your code, you want to make sure you inform them how your functions perform, why they do certain things, why they perform the actions that they do, letting other people understand it, but also even more for yourself too. Think about this, you have a bug in one of your plugins and you don't even know about it yet. Nobody's reported a bug. Developer goes in there, looks at your code, says, hey, this is why he did this. I can see that from the comments. He needs to go in or she needs to go in and rework this a little bit. Let me go ahead and I'm able to do that on my end. Let me send them a revision. So now you have other developers collaborating with you, fixing your bugs, enhancing your plugin. And think if you also hire another developer to work on the plugin that you've created, if they go in there kind of sort of blindfolded, not knowing how the plugin works, it's going to be a little bit difficult for them to kind of figure out and pick up where you left off.
You basically have to make it universal so that, or maybe not universal is the right word, but kind of in a way that anybody can come into it and from any walk of life and say, this is what they meant.
Yes,
as opposed to just a bunch of stuff that might be organized to you, but may not be organized to somebody else like myself or whoever the next guy is next to me. It's also good to test, and on the note of sort of developing this plugin, it's also good to test and debug.
Yeah.
Something,
Oh yeah, for sure. You always want to make sure you have WP debug enabled. If you don't know what that is, check out the WP config episode that we also filmed on Fresh Dev, not part of this series, but previous episode. Try to account for all use cases as much as you can. You're not going to be able to test every single use case, but you want to be going through your plugin and think like a user and actually even have other normal users test out the plugin. Non-developers going in, setting up the options, kind of see what their workflow is, and you're able to then say, okay, well, maybe we need to tweak this a little bit or debug this. They came up with an error. Definitely testing and debug is very important.
And then something we talked about last episode that looks like you wanted to bring up a big point about was the removal of data, sort of that good housekeeping. So basically, if you are deactivating a plugin, making sure that it's cleaned up when you've uninstalled that plugin so that you're not leaving remnants or traces of your plugin that don't need to be there. It's just good practice.
Yeah, and it does, bringing that point up, it does depend on your specific, instance, what data you may or may not remove. Dan brought up a good point in the last episode. If you have data that can be reused by other plugins or the theme or content, you may not want to remove that. So something to keep in mind. Most of the time, you'll probably be removing some of that data, but sometimes you say, hey, we want to keep it in
right?
there.
Why not? Any other sort of off-the-cuff advice you have for people getting into their first plugin before we sort of wrap this thing up?
Definitely check out the codex, WordPress codex. There are plenty of other tutorials out there on the web. That can definitely help you out. There's some tips out there for sure. And just get involved. I kind of go at it and, start developing. Look at other plugins for examples. GPL, one of the good things about it is you can reuse code as long as you give a copyright or a shout out to the author. So go into those other plugins, take a look at that code, bring it over to yours, fork it, modify it, do whatever you need to do. And for me, it's just a matter of getting in there and actually, developing it.
You develop in your sleep now, right? At this point, you've mastered the art.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I thought.
That's what I dream. I just all code.
Dreaming code.
Code all day.
dreaming white and courier. So we want you to also, as we just mentioned, see our plugin. Take a look at it. See what we have. So we're gonna have the social media share plugin on the web, on GitHub specifically. Our username is SDS Web, just one word there, or one thing of characters, SDS Web. We'll post the link as well, so you can click right and get right over there. Download the social share plugin that we've sort of been developing as we've been going through this process here, through these steps and through these different video series we've had.
Definitely, we've gone in, we've commented, we've used all of the topics that we've talked about and the techniques we've used in here. Take a look at the code, look at the comments. If you can't understand it, leave us a comment in the video below the video, and we'll be happy to help you answer it. Just take a look at what we've done. We've created a custom shortcode and options panel. We have our share buttons being output after the content on single posts and pages. So pretty neat, simple plugin, but gets the job done. Nice starting point. Take the code, fork it. Let us know what you come up with.
Yeah, we'd love to see it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. So again, as Scott said, post below. You can always, I'm sure we'll link all the other videos. So if you were watching this for the first time, you can go back and watch some of our other videos where we kind of go in depth on specific things like the hooks or the options panel and things like that. As always, subscribe at slocumstudio.com/subscribe for more of this great WordPress content. And of course, if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that big old red subscribe button right up there. Subscribe to us there. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks.